So let's begin. And first of all, daven that the fruits of our learning should help to bring home all of the hostages, protect our soldiers and all of the innocents, and bring a speedy end to all of our conflicts, and that it should also be a skula for my mother, Shalom Aleichem Bat Rachel.
Amen.
Okay, so does everybody see the screen? Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim. See the shared screen? Did I share it? Yeah, you see it. Okay, good. All right, so last time we looked at the tour, I decided, we did a little bit in the tour. I decided what we're going to do though. We're gonna read through the Shulchan Aruch, some of the Shulchan Aruch, and I want to read through some of the Aruch HaShulchan, which I think is very, very interesting the way he approaches this subject. So first, Michael Schwartz, I want you to read here from the beginning. Choleh Shetzarich.
Choleh shetzarich le'ochel, im yesh sham rofeh baki, afilu hu oved kokavim she'omer, im lo yachilu oto efshar sheyekabad alav hacholi leyistaken, machlin oto al piv, ve'ein tzarich lomer shema yamut.
Okay, stop here. So this is the first din. So explain or translate this.
Okay, so a sick person that needs to eat, if there is a expert doctor, even one who is a non-Jew, and they say that if you don't feed him, it's possible that his sickness will worsen and he will be endangered. We feed him according to the doctor's word, and it's not necessary to say that perhaps he'll die.
Yeah. So what does he mean? Ve'ein tzarich lamar shema yamut. What is that referring to?
It's just enough that he's going to get worse. And I guess there's always that possibility because his situation is getting worse.
Right. So he said, so if the doctor said if you don't feed him, it's possible that his sickness will get worse and he will become endangered, then we feed him. And certainly if the doctor said he may die if you don't feed
Okay.
him, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
like a continuation of that
Yeah.
earlier clause.
Yeah. He
See what
doesn't
I'm
need to say
saying?
it specifically.
Yeah, ein tzarich lamar, or it would also mean even certainly if he said that, but in any event. So in other words, when we talk here about the sick person on Yom Kippurim, we started to see this with the tour. We didn't go through all of the Rishonim because we see now at least two elements here that have been built into this din that we didn't see from the Gemara. So one of them, actually, do you see what they are? What are things that we see here that actually the Gemara didn't say explicitly?
One is that it doesn't matter if the doctor is Oved Kochavim.
Right. So the Gemara doesn't talk about that at all. The Gemara just says Baki. But there is discussion about this in Rishonim, and we saw this, I think, already in the tour. But even before the tour, if that for this halacha, the baki, it's not important that the baki be Jewish. It's not relevant. It's not relevant in the sense that in terms of determining the medical condition, whoever is expert is expert. And the halakha here is saying he does even if he is an idol worshiper, and also it'll say we'll see even if it's a woman, right? So the chiddush of the woman is, it sounds patriarchal, which it is, right? It's a kind of a patriarchal statement, but it also in the halachic context, it indicates that similar to one of the issues that we saw brought up in the Gemara, we're not looking at this case the same way we look at, for example, testimony in a court. So for most dinim that would come to a court, a woman's testimony is not accepted. But this isn't about testimony. This is about the state of the choleh. So it doesn't matter if somebody is a baki; they are baki, and their word is accepted. And then the second thing is in the Gemara. The second thing is what we just read. That is the Gemara. We added into the Mishnah. It says Mishnah says koleh machilinoto, right? Machilinoto pikiin. It didn't say koleh sheyesh bo sakana, right? So we added that in, but then in later poskim they say even if right now he's not in imminent danger of dying. And that we learn that out from the Gemara, not from we'll learn it out from a little bit further in the Sugya. But the idea of the Choleh who's besakana, it's saying even if right now he's not besakana. So that's the lashon. Im lo yachilu oto. If the doctor says if you don't feed him, efshar sheyichbad alav hacholi. It's possible that the current sickness, the current illness will become greater, it will become heavier upon him. And then he will be in danger, meaning he'll be, that could lead to something much worse. And then in essence, he spells it out. In other words, not only will he be in danger, meaning that his overall medical condition could worsen, certainly if it's clear that it could worsen to the point where he's going to die if he's not fed. So we've added layers. So the idea of not eating on Yom Kippur is still paramount, but as soon as somebody is sick, then we're going to be makil, to feed them. Now, exactly how you determine that, this is of course subject for halachic discussion. How do you determine based on the medical condition they need to eat or not? But here, basically what we're saying is that a doctor knows. We're going to leave it up to the doctor. The other thing I'll throw in about this, which you're probably aware of, is in classical medicine, like the way the Rambam speaks, right? So if you want to know a little bit about the Rambam's approach to medicine, look in Hilchot Deot. The Rambam also wrote medical tracts, which I don't own them, but they were published a number of years ago. They were translated from the Arabic and published, but if you want his basic approach to medicine, you can find it in Hilchot Deot. And what you'll see there is that the Rambam gives a lot of weight to one's food intake, which was part of the classical medicine, which, as I understand, the Rambam's classical medicine traces mainly back to Galen. And it came to the Rambam through Arabic translations. But Galen was very popular as a medical source, even though a lot of things that Galen thought were later, in modern times were proven not to be correct. But some of them are correct. And the idea of diet and medicine, which I would say Western medicine kind of got away from and now is coming back to, is very important. So this idea of determining what one would eat for a particular illness, that was really a part and parcel of being a doctor. That was always part and parcel of being a doctor. That's my little side comment. Michael Schwartz, so continue till the end of this halacha. 1 second. There we go. So you're up to here.
אפילו אם החולה אומר אינו צריך, שומעים לרופא. אם החולה אומר צריך אני, אפילו 100 רופאים אומרים אינו צריך, שומעים לחולה.
Okay, so explain that.
So even if the sick person says that he doesn't need to eat, we listen to the doctor. If the sick person says that I need to eat, even if there are 100 doctors that say that he doesn't need to eat, we listen to the chole.
Okay, and so that's what we saw in the Gemara, and again, the even 100 doctors. That's like the conclusion of our sugya according to Mar Baravashi. Michael Werner, you'll read that. Okay. Go ahead.
רופא אחד אומר צריך, ורופא אחד אומר אינו צריך. מאכילים אותו. Do I read the bit in the brackets?
So first just explain what you read.
So one doctor says the sick person needs to eat, and another doctor says the sick person doesn't need to eat. We feed the sick person.
Okay, so now read the Haggah.
Haggah. V'hu hadin l'shnayim neged shnayim. Afilu ketzatan yoter v'ki'in miktzatan ken nirei li.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So that is the verdict. That is the judgment of 2 against 2. So if there are two doctors against 2 doctors, we feed this sick person. But even if there are kitzatan,
from the word ktsat.
Even if there are fewer.
No, not fewer. Some.
Even if there are some, okay.
If some of them, it's ktsatan, ktsat mehen.
Okay,
some
so
of them.
Even if some of them are more expert than some of the others. So even if some of the doctors who say that he doesn't need to eat are more expert than the doctors who say that he does need to eat, then it seems to me that judgment still holds.
Or that judgment holds.
Meaning that we feed the sick person.
Yes. Yeah. So if you remember, we looked at the Rambam, and I mentioned to you when we were learning, we looked at the Rambam, when we looked at the Tur. I mentioned to you there is a machloket between the Rambam and the Ramban about this question of how much weight we give to bikiyin. So this is the Rambam. Does everybody see the Rambam? Yeah, okay. Right, so I'm going to read this quickly because I want to go back to the Shulchan Aruch, but this is just to remind us. So here the Rambam says, Cholesh sheyesh bo sakana, starts off with that, who asked to eat on Yom Kippur, even though the doctors, the expert doctors, say to him he doesn't need to eat, we feed him according to his own statement, ad shemar dai, until he says enough. Okay, so we pointed this out. The Rambam starts off by explicitly talking about, first of all, cholesh yesh bo sakana, even though he hasn't defined it here, he also talks about this idea of cholesh sheyesh bo sakana elsewhere in the Mishnah Torah. But cholesh sheyesh bo sakana would mean somebody who is sick and could die from the sickness or be severely debilitated. So, and he also starts off specifically with the cholet shesha'al lechol. He's talking about a cholet where the cholet asked to eat. This is important, right? So even though the expert doctors say he doesn't need to eat, in other words, they disagree with the cholet, we feed him according to his own statement until he says enough. But if the cholet says, I don't need to eat, and a doctor says he does need to eat, then we feed him according to the doctor. And the Rambam says, V'hushi harofe baki, provided that the doctor is an expert. So if it's not a rofe baki, however we'll define that, then we wouldn't necessarily feed him according to the rofe has to be a rofe baki. Then, if one doctor says he needs to eat, another doctor says he doesn't need to eat, we feed him. The Rambam is still operating in the context of the choleh who says, I don't need to eat. That's when we start to have this problem if doctors disagree. So if the choleh says, I don't need to eat, and there are two doctors and one says yes, one says no, then we feed him. But if some of the doctors say he needs and some of them say he doesn't need to eat, then we go after the rove or after the bikim. We go after the majority or we go after who's more expert. In other words, according to the Rambam, expertise can come into play in this context when there are differences in the case where the choleh says, I don't need to eat, and there's a difference opinion among doctors, then either you go after most of the doctors, or if some of the doctors are more expert, then you rely on their expertise.
So I'm sorry just to clarify. So if the majority said, I mean, what if the doctors who are more expert are in the minority? Which one do we give more weight to? The
So
majority?
according to so the Rambam indicates that if the doctors who are more expert are in the minority and they say to feed him, then we would use their expertise. That would be machriya. That would be decisive, even if they're in the minority. But if they're in that they are more expert, the Rambam says we give more weight to their expertise than we do to the majority opinion. And not everybody agrees with this. By the way, also the truth is it would work the other way around as well. That if the majority, if the expert doctor says he doesn't need to eat, then I would go with the more expert doctors there that he would need to eat. So it's a kul and a chumrah, right? Depends on the situation. And this is all provided that the choles doesn't say that he needs to eat. Again, the Rambam makes sure that you understand that this whole question of how many doctors and how you go and who has more authority and so forth, that's as long as the choleh himself says, I don't need to eat. But if he says, I need to eat, then we feed him. If the choleh did not say that he needs to eat, and there's a machloket among the rofim, there's a difference of opinion among the doctors, and all of them were experts, presumably that all of them have equal expertise, and the ones who say that he needs are the same number as the one who says say he doesn't need to eat, we feed him, implying what? That if there's a majority that says he doesn't need to eat, then we go after the majority. And there, because the expertise is the same, then the majority is going to rule. But I also want to point out something else about the Rambam's Lashon here. There is a difference between what he says here, Amar HaCholeh Eini Tzarich, or חולה שיש בו סכנה ששאל לאכול. So the chole here is doing something active in both cases. In the first case, he's requesting to eat, and then we feed him. And in the second instance, it's talking about Amar, where the chole said, he actively said, I don't need to eat. We get down to this last part here. It's lo amar hachole shu tzarich. It's passive. The chole didn't say that he needs to eat. And then there's a machloket among rofim. So what's the point of that? Because as we'll see this is essentially how the Aruch HaShulchan begins, which we'll see hopefully a little bit today. The reality is there could be many cases where the chole doesn't say anything because he's sick. It's not that he says, I need to eat or I don't need to eat. What if the chole is just sick in bed and he can't say anything? And this is what's implied, I would say, from this section. The Rambam, lo amar chole shu tzarich. The chole doesn't say he needs to eat. And then there's a machloka between Rofim. If all of them are Bikim, then you go after the Rov. And what he said earlier, what he seemed to say earlier, is that, but if some of them are more Baki than others, then we go after the Bikiyut. Okay, that's just to remind us of what we saw here in the Rambam. But go ahead.
In a practical situation, I don't understand this. That one of the big, that there are Bekim which are more Baki than other ones. I don't know about doctors who would say that I'm not an expert, that he is an expert, that I'm not an expert. So
no, actually,
that doesn't make sense.
No, I think lahefech, especially nowadays, especially with the way the modern Western medicine is practiced, you get that all the time because there's high specialization. So it's if he has an intestinal problem, and there are two doctors, and one is a cardiologist, and one is a gastroenterologist. So the gastroenterologist is going to be more expert. That's his field. That's his expertise. Or lahefech, if it's a heart problem, if the only doctor there is a dentist, dentists are also doctors, right? Dentists actually, they have to have full medical training, but they only specialize in teeth. So if there's a dentist there and he doesn't know anything else, but he knows basic medicine, you'll ask him. But if there's a dentist there and a cardiologist there and it's a heart problem, you're going to go with the cardiologist. He's more expert. It's not that
you have no time. Somebody is fainting and you have to know immediately. You don't know if he has a heart attack or it's just weak because he didn't eat or something like this.
So exactly, and this is so exactly. So the practical. So first of all, but that was just to answer your question. I think this idea that some doctors have more expertise than others. This is actually something that we all think. We all have this in our heads because those are the doctors we go to. You don't always go to a general practitioner. You'll go to a general practitioner and then you might get a referral. No, wait.
You are not in hospital now. You are in the shul and somebody is fainting. It's not,
wait. So I'm saying I told you I agree with that, and that's going to be the question that's going to be the question that we'll see that's dealt with more directly by the Aruch HaShulchan. In other words, so far here, beginning with the Gemara and up until now, we talk about a chole. And there's some understanding that this chole may need to eat, either because the chole says I need to eat, or because doctors around him or other people around him thinks that he might need to eat. So yes, nowadays we have this situation. The situation could be that maybe it was ever thus, right? But maybe the person is in shul or maybe they're at home. You don't start off unless you're already ill, you don't start off Yom Kippur in the hospital. So you're right. But it's always going to depend on the situation. But if we take a situation where somebody is ill, and right now I need to make a decision, then these rules are going to apply. These rules may also apply even if they're hospitalized, but they'll apply here and now. So it could happen that somebody faints in shul, and maybe there are no doctors there. So then what do you do? Right? And so actually we'll see that in the Aruch HaShulchan. I mean, it'll say, look, actually that's kind of where he begins from. Just
There could be a situation where you have to
defibrillate.
You have to you have to decide in advance that a person has got some sickness, and the doctor has to decide if he's allowed it at all to
Yes. So far, so this question of what you would do if you know in advance that there's a problem, we'll also talk about that, and then that gets into this question of shiurin, which we'll delve into. But so far, this siman and what the sugyan in Gemara that we've seen so far is talking about a choleh right now on Yom Kippur. If we know already before Yom Kippur, so then yes, we're going to go after what we know prior. So with that, Paul, I want you to read Halacha Gimel v'ima choleh.
ואם החולה ורופא אחד עמו אומרים שאינו צריך, ורופא אחד אומר צריך, או שהחולה אינו אומר כלום ורופא אחד אומר צריך, ושניים אומרים אינו צריך, אין מאכילים אותו.
Right, so this is where your idea of the flow chart would come in, but just explain what you read.
Well, it's complicated. And if the sick person and one doctor who is with him say that he doesn't have to eat, and another doctor says he should eat, or if the sick person doesn't say anything, and one doctor says he has to eat, and two of them say he doesn't have to eat, then we feed him.
No, ein machilin oto.
אין מאכילים אותו, לא מאכילים אותו.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think it clipped out of my sound. Right. So in these two cases, we don't feed him. So what's the first case? The choleh and the roof and a doctor say he doesn't need to eat, and one doctor says he does. Or the choleh doesn't say anything. So his opinion now is not relevant because he doesn't voice an opinion. And there's one doctor against two doctors who say he doesn't need to eat. So these are cases where we don't feed him. These are cases where we don't feed him. Let's continue on. Actually, Paul, why don't you read this next one also? אם שניים אומרים.
אם שניים אומרים צריך, אפילו 100 אומרים אינו צריך, ואפילו החולה אומר עמהם שאינו צריך, מאכילים אותו מאחר ששניים אומרים צריך.
Stop.
So if two doctors think that he has got to eat, even if there are 100 other doctors who say that he doesn't have to eat, and even if the sick person says that he doesn't have to eat, you nevertheless feed him.
Right, and why?
Why? Because, since there are two doctors who said that he should eat.
Okay, so
it's enough. So the two doctors, you decide according to the two doctors who think that he should eat.
Right.
And
so
the opinion of the sick person and all the other 100 doctors don't.
Notwithstanding.
Yes, don't count.
So okay, so you see this is how the Shulchan Aruch is building up the din, and so now we're up to this case where we maybe have a lot of doctors, but the chidush here is that right me'achar sheshnayim omrim tzarich. Once you have two doctors who say he needs to eat, then that's what's kovea, and that goes that that was that was part of the way that part of the thing that came up in the sugya that we learned in the Gemara, that there is a significance to two as opposed to just one. But yeah, go ahead.
No, but the way the language, the Hebrew is quite modern.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like medieval Hebrew or something like this.
It's a pretty straightforward Hebrew. Okay, I have no more comment on it, but you're right. But here, read the Haggah. והוא הדין.
והוא הדין עם החולה ורופא אחד עמו אומרים, and it is still true if the sick person and one doctor with him say, צריך, אף על פי ש100 רופאים אומרים אינו צריך, מאכילים אותו. זה המקור בטור, כנראה זאת הכוונה.
Yeah, the tour is the makor. Right, which we saw the tour is also ultimately based on the Gemara, but that's the psak of the tour. V'lo chayshinan.
ולא חיישינן דהחולה אומר, oh, this is not modern Hebrew. צריך משום דמאמין לרופא זה שאומר צריך, זה בא מהבית יוסף בשם
Hamari.
Okay.
Okay, so what does that mean? V'lo chayshinan.
Chayshinan, לחוש, לא יודע, I don't know.
Right. Chayshinan would be lo chosheshim.
חוששים.
That in Hebrew we'd say lo chosheshim. Lo chosheshim, shehacholel. Yeah. So
you are not, איך אומרים לחשוש באנגלית?
in this case we would say we wouldn't be we wouldn't suspect.
Suspect, yeah. That that a sick person says, I have to eat. משום דמאמין לרופא זה שאומר. This because we are going to believe the doctor who says that he has to eat. It's a quite.
If we put it all together,
I'm not sure I didn't understand.
So right, okay. Let's put it all together. So it says what he's saying is, we don't suspect that the reason that the sick person is now saying that they need to eat is because they believe the doctor who says that he needs to eat. In other words, maybe the sick person doesn't know, or maybe the sick person either doesn't have an opinion, or maybe he really thinks he doesn't need to eat, but he hears the doctor saying he needs to eat. And maybe that's what's swaying him to now say, I need to eat. He said, we don't worry about that. In other words, because you see, I'll say this in a very broad sense, because I don't want to get too bogged down in all of the numbers. But if it's a numbers game, that is, if we're going to be swayed by the opinion of an expert along with the opinion of the choleh in the case that we're going to feed him, so you might say, maybe I shouldn't believe the choleh at all. If the doctor voices his opinion before the choleh, maybe I shouldn't give any weight to the choleh. Because the Choleh will hear the doctor and he'll say, I'm with the doctor. And he'll just say it, I also think I need to eat. So the Ramah here, this is the Ramah in the Haggadah. So the Ramah is saying, we don't worry about that. We're not worried that even if that's the reason that the Choleh is now voicing his opinion that he needs to eat, it's just because he heard it from the doctor. It's okay, but his opinion still counts. We're going to do the next two here. So, and then I want to go to the Aruch HaShulchan. So, Michael Schwartz, Im Choleh.
אם החולה אומר, אינו צריך, והרופא מסופק, מאכלין אותו. אבל אם הרופא אומר, אינו צריך, והחולה אומר, איני יודע, אין מאכלין אותו. So if the sick person says that he doesn't need to eat, and the doctor isn't sure, then we feed him. But if the doctor says he doesn't need to eat, and the sick person says, I'm not sure, then we don't feed him.
Okay. Pretty straightforward. But you see, what we're doing, we're going through different possible permutations of what could happen. So in the case where the Choleh says, I don't need to eat, and the doctor isn't sure, then I feed him. So what's the reason I feed him? If the Choleh himself says, I don't need to eat.
Also, I mean, there's a suffix sakana, and in case of suffix sakana, we rule leniently.
Right. Very good. So in other words, the Rofei doesn't say absolutely not to feed him. He says, I'm not sure if he needs to eat or not. So now so now there's a
Shall you froze for a little bit.
Oh,
then when I'm back, my back. Can you hear me? Okay. Let's see if I get back. Hello.
Hello.
well,
Hey, am I back?
Yes,
you have been shut down by the administration.
Uh-oh. Now you're frozen. I you tell me that you couldn't hear me, and then all of you froze on my screen.
It's gone.
All right. Am I back? Do you hear me?
Yes, you are back. Yeah.
Okay.
The
All right.
screen.
Hang on a second. I'm doing this thing with my phone again, which hopefully. So don't worry. I didn't go on for a long time because I did hear you tell me that you couldn't hear anything. So I will try to make time to edit that out of the recording, but if I have time, I'll do that. All right, but in any event, so if the safek is the safek of the doctor, where the chole says he doesn't need to eat, then machriin oto. If the safek is the safek of the chole, where the doctor says he doesn't need, that isn't considered to be a reason to feed him. So this seems to show that the Shulchan Aruch gives a certain amount of weight to the bikiyut of the doctor, right? Because the second part is, if the doctor says he doesn't need to eat, and the chole says, I don't know, which is seems to be another way of saying that he's not sure, then I don't feed him. We don't feed him in that case. If the doctor says that he doesn't know, then we feed him. Well, doctors doesn't see there is a difference in Lashon though. Doctor doesn't say I don't know, because that could be saying my medical opinion here is irrelevant. He says I don't know. It means I as a doctor I have nothing to say, because maybe he's a dentist and maybe this guy has is having a heart attack and he doesn't. Actually, I think dentists know a fair amount about that, because sometimes that happens when people are getting dental work. But whatever it is, I don't have to come up with the scenario, but you can imagine. The safek of the rofei is the rofei who has expertise, and they're saying, in this particular instance, my medical expertise, it could go either way. I'm not sure if he should eat, or if he has to eat, or he doesn't have to eat. But there's enough of a bikiyut factor that's there that will tell me that I have to feed him. The chole, we assume, has no expertise, and he says, I don't know. And the Rofeh says he doesn't need. So then I'm going out there. The Choleh has effectively taken himself out of the discussion when he says I don't know. And because the Rofeh says he doesn't need to eat, then we don't feed him. Michael Werner, Im HaRofeh Omer.
אם הרופא אומר שאינו מכיר את החולה. החולה, thank you. הרי הוא כאדם דעלמא ואין דבריו מועילים ולא מורדים.
Okay, so explain that.
So if the sick person says,
no, Im HaRofeh.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was looking straight at that, and I just if the doctor says
okay
that he doesn't know the sick person.
No, that's why I corrected you. Choli is not sick person. Choli is a sickness.
The sickness. Okay, thank you. So if the doctor says that he doesn't know the sickness, then he is like then he's like a layperson, effectively. And
okay, go ahead. I'll tighten that.
And his words do not raise up, and his words not raise up, and they don't lower. So they basically don't go either way. His words don't tilt things in either direction.
Yeah. So just to clarify, this lashon of the alma, you should all know from davening, is Aramaic for what word in Hebrew? The alma divra chirutei.
Olam.
Olam. It's just the word olam in Aramaic. In this context, the alma, ka'adam, the alma. So it literally means he's just a person in the world, meaning he's like anybody. That is, his status as an expert is not relevant. If he says, I don't know this sickness, I'm not familiar with this sickness, then the fact that he's a doctor is irrelevant, because his expertise doesn't apply to this particular sickness. He might as well be a cab driver. It doesn't matter. right? So that's the that was something that there was a certain implication about that from the last halakha, but now he's saying Shulchan Aruch was saying this expressly. So if the doctor, right? So the guy is sick on Yom Kippur. You ask the doctor to come. The doctor looks at, does his examination, says, I have no idea. Like I don't know this sickness. I don't know what's going on. Then ein dvarav moilin velo moridin. So usually usually this phrase, it's ein dvarav ma'alin velo moridin, which would be exactly what Michael Werner said. Here it says mo'ilin. There is a difference between ma'alin and mo'ilin. Ma'alin means to raise up. Mo'ilin means to help, right? To have some utility. So, and I didn't check this. I'm guessing that they're different Yirsa'ot here, but it means effectively what Michael Werner said. He's like a person. He's like any person in the world, and his words, in other words, his opinion, don't add on or take away. Or his opinion is essentially irrelevant. Now, Michael Werner, read the Haggav. Mihu.
Mihu, so in a case where the sick person weakens greatly to the point that it is said, that to the point where
Not
most...
Shinirao. First, I want you to read the words. I know you're trying to translate
I'm
it
sorry,
right off, but I want you to read the words. That's okay.
Mihu im נחלש הרבה עד שנראה לרוב בני אדם שאצלו שהוא מסוכן אם לא יאכל, מאכלים אותו.
Okay.
So
Now you can explain.
So in a case where the sick person gets so weak that most people that are near him would say he's in danger if he doesn't eat, then we feed him.
Right. And this last Haggah, this is interesting because this is the end of this part of the discussion in the Shulchan Aruch. But this may be the most common kind of situation, going back to things that, like what Paul raised, right? So what's the reality? What if somebody, let's say, is in shul on Yom Kippur, and somebody comes so weak that anybody looking at him says, this, he's in danger. This is a dangerous situation if he doesn't eat, that we feed him. And that's without it, that's without any experts per se, but some things, we don't necessarily have to have an expert tell us when common sense is going to tell us that he has to eat. And so with that, I'm going to switch over to the Aruch HaShulchan. And I think we'll just keep it here. Can everybody see these words okay? Because I can open this up. It's okay?
It's fine for me.
Okay. I can make it a little bit bigger. It'll just save time because I didn't have it open in the other source. I'm going to start reading this, and then I will bring you in later to read it. Since now we're toward the end of the shiur, I'm going to do the reading. So this is the Aruch HaShulchan. Da'at b'mishnah u'v'gmara u'v'poskim mevuar. Da'achilat ha'choleh b'yom ha'kippurim talui b'rovim u'v'choleh atzmo. Right. So he starts up, as the Aruch HaShulchan sometimes does, or often does. He's going to give us an overview to begin with. He says in the Mishnah and in the Gemara and in Poskim, it's explained that this issue of a sick person eating on Yom Kippur is dependent on doctors and the sick person himself. as Kamosha Shanina Mishnah Sham, as we learned in the Mishnah there, Chole Ma'achilina Talpi Bikin, Imen Sham Bikin Ma'achilina Talpi Atzmo. Right, that's the Mishnah that we've been going over. Ve'ech hadin kishe'ein sham rofeh. So what's the din when there is no doctor? V'chole eino omer klum, and the sick person doesn't say anything. Kamo shekein birov hamachalot, which is the reality in most illnesses. In other words, at the moment that somebody is exhibiting symptoms, in most cases, there isn't going to be a doctor right there. And maybe the sick person is so struck, maybe they fainted, maybe they, for whatever reason, they can't say anything. And he's saying this is the reality in most cases. V'yadanu shachole yomar tamid lahachmir. This is an interesting part. He says, and we know that the sick person would always say to be machmir. In other words, a typical frum Jew on Yom Kippur. I've had experience with this. I don't know if you have, right? But I've known people who've been told by their doctor not to fast, and they still want to fast. And they're the ones who push for shiurim and all of that. So he's saying, look, he's saying, what happens if this person on Yom Kippurim, he suddenly is struck with, symptoms of some kind of illness, and he can't speak, and there isn't a doctor, and we know that he would be machmir to say, no, don't feed me. Right? So we're not going to go by his words, right? We don't establish something based on his words because we know he's always going to be machmir. So it would seem to then be that all of these dinim, all of these laws that are going to be explained, Heim b'cholim she'ein anu yodim im yesh behem sakana in love. All of these dinim, this is his introduction to the siman of the Shulchan Aruch that we were just reading. It would seem to be that all of this discussion about the choles is this, and the Rav says that, and there are many rofim, there are not many rofim. That's if we don't know if he's actually besakana, if he's actually in danger. B'choli shel sakana, an illness that's dangerous, ein kan lo she'ela v'lo deot. Here, there's no question, and there aren't opinions. In other words, we're not going to start asking the cholam. We're not going to start getting how many opinions from the doctors. Ufshita she'ein menichin lo lihitanot. Obviously, you don't let them fast. Dein lecha sakana yoter mizeh. There's no greater sakana than making this sick person fast when we know that he's besakana. Umanikra sakana. So okay, so then you must say to me, so what does it mean that he's besakana? Kishe'ein kan rofeh, and there is not a doctor here who's going to be able to diagnose him, and we don't know if he's what does that mean? He's besakana. He says nirek dishikamutal b'mita. If he's confined to bed, right? He's now lying in bed. That is, maybe, or I'm going to add in, and this is what the Aruch HaShulchan clearly means. Not maybe he couldn't get out of bed, or maybe he now is in shul, like Paul talks about the person who faints in shul, and now he's lying on the floor. He can't get out of bed. In other words, he can't pick himself up. You assume that that's a person who's besakana, person who's so sick that they're lying down and they can't get up. I'm adding in the word assume, but he's saying this is obviously a person who's besakana. I'll tell you about that in a second. Oh, there, I think it turns out it's probably Ger, Havi sakana. So this is translations to Russian. Fortunately, I know Russian people. I know a professional translator, and I consulted her, and she sent me the Wikipedia article in Russian on Sokhotka, which is actually syphilis. And I don't know, and there she says it's probably zher, which just means fever. And but mibalei shachefet would be somebody who has shachefet. In modern Hebrew, and apparently even in earlier, shachefet referred to tuberculosis, also called consumption, right? So it's not clear. I don't know enough about this, and I didn't even try to read through the whole article in Russian about Zochotka, but he's talking about people who are very ill. There, Havi Sakana. Even if we are not sure, הרי ספק פיקוח נפש גם כן דוחה שבת ויום הכיפורים. Right, so that's the general rule. If we're not sure of the diagnosis, we're going to be, our safek is going to lead us to say that Yom Kippurim is pushed aside, just like Shabbos is pushed aside for a cholesh yesh bo sakana. So this is his introduction, which is very important. In other words, this goes, I think, really very much to all the questions that, especially that Paul was raising, like what, what's the reality? So he starts off with, look, the reality is, we know, the reality is if somebody suddenly becomes ill on Yom Kippur, the reality is there may not be a doctor there. And we have to, and by the time the doctor comes, maybe something is going to be too late. We have to make a decision right now. So the default decision is going to be if somebody exhibits symptoms, which basically saying any really dangerous distress, then you feed them. And this whole issue of the dayot, etc., he'll get into that. I'm going to stop here, this is the Aruch HaShulchan on this siman is kind of long, and I think we're going to do all of it, but I want to do some of it before we move on to the next part of the sugya, because this does get into practical consideration. Not that everything we've done has practical considerations, but I will say that the kind of this back and forth about the numbers and so forth, this is all relevant, but it may not be as relevant on the spot in any given situation. So we have to see what all of this means in a larger context, and I think the Aruch HaShulchan supplies the larger context. So with that, are there any last questions or comments?
Actually, a bit of a side comment or side question, but at some point, I'd be interested in hearing more about the issue of when one davens for a hole, when one says to Tehillim, and so on.
You know what? That it's interesting. Yeah, because of my mother's situation, I've also been going over this. I'll refer you.
You brought it up in the very, very beginning, sort of elliptically.
I did. You know what? Tuli Nadir, I'll talk to you about a little bit at the beginning of next week's shir. A very good source for that, in terms of what you asked, in terms of how we daven and so forth. I have this from some tshuvot, but there's also there's a book called the Gesher HaChayim by Rav Tokchinsky. The Gesher HaChayim, which I own hard copies of, but you can also download from HebrewBooks.org. It's Rav Tokchinsky's, essentially his modern version of the Ramban's Torah Adam, which I mentioned in an earlier year. The Torah Adam, I told you it starts off by talking about someone who is sick. So it talks about halachot surrounding a sick person, about bikur cholim, and so forth. And as the sickness progresses, and when we violate Shabbat or Yom Kippur, and all of that. So the Gesher Chaim, and then it goes all the way through until a person dies, and all of the dinim surrounding death and the kfura and so forth. And this is essentially what the Gesher Chaim does. Most of it is about Avelut and Tahara. He says in his introduction that Rav Tokchinsky was a Rav in Yerushalayim earlier in the 20th century, and he had been asked to write a book to lay down what Minhag Yerushalayim was for issues of the Tahara of the mate and issues surrounding Avelut and Kfura that were specific to Yerushalayim. And so he eventually succumbed to this request. It's also interesting because part of the reason he does is because it was in his time, and he was living, I don't remember when he passed away, but I think he wrote the book, I have to check, I think he wrote the book in the 30s. So, in the 30s, in the 20s, but more in the 30s and even the 40s, is when you start to get more Jews coming from different, and then of course, certainly after 48, you get Jews coming from very different places, ending up in Yerushalayim. And so what is Minhag Yerushalayim when you have so many Edot living in Yerushalayim? This is a problem we have today, as it were. Minhag used to go after Minhag HaMakom. From the time of the Mishnah, we have this idea of Minhag HaMakom. And so if you lived in
That's not
a city
what's happening.
in Morocco, what's that?
It's not what's happening. People they go according to Minhag Avot, velo Makom. You have all these Bate Knesset. Everybody has his own minhag according
This
to
is
his
the point.
parents.
This is the point I'm making. So traditionally, you would go after Minhag HaMakom, and people didn't move around so much, right? So if you had the Minhag from Morocco, you were in Morocco. If you had a Minhag from Czechia, you were in Czechia. But what happens when the guy from Czechia and the guy from Morocco are living next door to each other in Yerushalayim, right? So what do you do? So these are the issues of kibbutz galuyot, right? That we didn't deal with them so much. Chazal dealt with this, beginning with the Mishnah in Psachim that talks about if you come from one place and you go to another place, that you go after Minhag HaMakom. Maybe you have to also keep the minhag that you brought with you. There's a whole diyun about that. But what happens when you have a bunch of people coming into the same place all at once? And so this is also true in Sofrut. This is an issue in Sofrut. It's an issue in many things, also in issues of kashrut, because there were different minhagim about shchita and about
Pesach.
whatnot, right? And certainly Pesach, we have issues. So in any event, to go back, Rav Tokchinsky was asked about what Minhag Yerushalayim is, so he writes this down. And I think Rav Tokchinsky was Koveya. He refers sometimes to Sfaradim, but he was writing mainly for the Ashkenazi Kihila in Yerushalayim. And I'm not completely up to date, but I think his book is still widely considered to be a source for Ashkenazi, and to some degree maybe also Sfaradi. But anyway, that was all to answer Michael Werner's question. He talks about this in different parts of the first chapters. He talks about Tehillim you say for a sick person, and under different circumstances. and how you daven. Beli neder, I'll try to say something about this next time. And I will send you my mother's name, and when I send out the shiur, and because of her situation, I want you just to daven that she should be as comfortable as possible. And if you're a person who says Tehillim, then say Tehillim. And I may recommend certain particular prakim, but I appreciate very much your asking. So Bezrat Hashem, I'll see you next week. Everybody have Shabbat Shalom.
All right, thank you. Good night.
Shalom.
Good night.
Night.
יישר כוח.
Baruch.